Hello, everybody. Welcome back. In our last lectures, we were discussing protein synthesis and understanding the process from which we get this instruction manual from the DNA and how we go from DNA to an actual protein. And in this lecture, we're going to be covering and understanding complex genetic inheritance. So you've probably previously before looked and studied Punnett squares and understood concepts of Mendel's P's, and we've also included a short reading in your book that covers some of this. But since I'm sure the vast majority of you have had this content before, we're going to be really discussing how genetics works when things aren't a simple 4x4 Punnett square. And if you want a quick review, I did put up a good short video on the website that sort of covers our basic understanding of inheritance of traits and some of Mendel's famous P experiments. But today we're really going to be focusing on understanding sex-inherited traits and understanding how genes can interact with their environment to form complex trait different variety of traits. So, as an introduction for this section, I wanted to cover a very fascinating topic that we've briefly discussed before regarding epigenetics. And epigenetics is simply the interaction of whether or not a gene is turned on or off based on environmental factors. And some of the most important studies that we know regarding epigenetics happen to look with experiences of famine or stress in humans. So this is an awesome study that sort of pioneered some of this field, where it looked at siblings who were born during a famine in 1944, and compared their methylation, so the percent change in methylation. So basically, again, remembering, going back to some of our understanding of biochemistry, methylation is basically a way that we can turn off specific genes. And they found that in siblings that lived through this epigenetic period of this famine, we see that the methylation sites actually go down as compared to the siblings who were born after this famine. So basically, what this shows is that famine actually influenced whether or not genes were turned on or off in individuals. And what's important about this is that trait, whether or not you have that trait turned on or off, can potentially be passed down to their future offspring. And so again, we're starting to understand the complexities that exist between your genetic code and the environment in which you grow up. So your chapter in your book in this last section starts to examine some of these complexities with environment and genetics by looking at the concept of intersex in individuals. Now, a couple lectures ago, we did go over some of the dynamics of intersex and those who are born with various sexual traits, but today we're going to really dive into what that means biologically. So let's consider some of the key terms that we think about when we're talking about biological sex. And again, this is really just focusing on the strict biology. And so I'll be using the term biological sex, even though obviously there can be dramatic differences that can occur. So first thing that we need to understand is that sex hormones are produced by gonads. So typically ovaries in quote-unquote female individuals and testes in quote-unquote male individuals. Again, I'm just using these terms in a very strict biological sense here. And those gonads can produce different forms of androgens. So testes typically is testosterone and ovaries estrogen. And again, so in this context, we see that males produce these higher levels of testosterone and females produce higher levels of estrogen. So a way that I'll be referring to these in the future for now is understanding basically female reproductive systems coming from ovaries and male reproductive systems coming from testes. So when we start to talk about the interaction of genes in the environment, one of the first interactions that we have to talk about is actually the environment of the fetus and how different hormones can actually develop in utero. So in this case, this depends on the sets of chromosomes that are received from parents. And we talked about this previously where we were looking at these karyotype plots where we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, so 46 chromosomes altogether. 22 pairs are the autosomes, and then we have this one pair of sex chromosomes with the X and the Y. And in the absence of a Y chromosome, the female will develop into, again, a quote-unquote female, and males are XY. So what does that mean in terms of what's happening at a cellular level? So again, I'm sure that we've covered this. We have covered some of this. These concepts previously. I'm sure you've also encountered them in your other introductory biology classes. But what we have to start to think about is understanding what genetic components come from from one donor and your other donor. So in this case, we have sperm and we have eggs, and we see that males always carry the Y chromosome and inherit one X chromosome from their mother. So quote-unquote sons inherit the Y chromosome from the quote-unquote father and the X chromosome from the quote-unquote mother. And then daughters inherit that one X chromosome from mother and one X chromosome from father. So let's look at what happens genetically beyond just understanding the X and Y chromosome. So what the important gene that we're talking about in terms of testes development is a gene called the SRY gene. And this is what ultimately will signal to the testes to develop. And then the testes produce testosterone. However, as we've talked about previously and looked at briefly in our other videos and lecture materials, there's a lot of varieties that can happen in terms of sex and intersex individuals. So these are just, this is a good overview looking at the different variations that occur. Again, this is all talking about the genetic, hormonal, and anatomical behaviors. And it really is not looking at all at gender. We're specifically looking at the specific biological categories of chromosomes, gonads, and then genitalia. So you can see that, we have what would be our quote-unquote typical, where you have a female XX, gonads are ovaries, and then the genitalia is female in appearance. However, we can get a variety of different hermaphroditisms where we see that where the chromosomes are XX, the gonads are ovaries, but you can have male genitalia. And there are even more complex syndromes that can include having XXX, such as triple X syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, and XYY syndrome. So it's important to recognize that there is a lot more than just understanding whether or not you have an X or a Y to determine biological sex. And there are even more differences when we start exploring the world of gender. And where we're going to pick up next time is understanding the sex-linked inheritance and exploring exactly what that means even further. So I'll see you soon.